The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.
Hello and welcome to The Firm. On the show this week, who is John Doe and why is he blocking websites en masse? And after many years, ADRs are back in fashion. Find out why. Gangs of Wasseypur, Bang Bang, Piku, Bombay Velvet and now Masan. Movies in India are relying on John Doe to fight piracy. Who is John Doe and why is he shutting down not just pirated copies or links but entire websites? Ayush Alawadi reports that the battle against pirates is wounding the good guys as well.
2 days before critically acclaimed movie Masan hit the cinema halls, producer Phantom Films approached the Bombay High Court to seek an order against film pirates. The petition sought to block named and unnamed pirates based on apprehensions of a breach of copyright. Phantom Films argued that there were dormant links of its movie on several websites and it anticipated that these links would become active around the time of the movie's release. It claimed that it would be practically impossible to monitor downloads if such an order was not passed. So the Bombay High Court granted what's called a John Doe order against named and unnamed entities.
In India, we call it popularly as an Ashok Kumar order. That's the nomenclature that we give. But basically, a John Doe order is an order against an unknown defendant. Very, very similar to a representative suit. So effectively, anytime there is a violation or a contemplation that there is going to be any kind of piracy, on the apprehension of that piracy, in pure copyright language, what we commonly call it is a kiat-amit action. So a kiat-amit action is an action for apprehension of breach on the basis of which you maintain a John Doe order.
Just outside the Bombay High Court, pirated films are available for as little as 200 rupees. Policing DVD hawkers or cable channel pirates is tough but not impossible. But the modern day pirate is a nameless, faceless torrent stream shifting from server to server and country to country. Last week's release Drishyam has been available online all week. More and more filmmakers are asking for John Doe orders or Ashok Kumar injunctions to save themselves crores in financial losses.
Producer approaches a court stating that they anticipate large-scale piracy of the movie, and one of the modes which is specified by them includes the internet. Within this, they may sometimes annex a list of popular file-sharing websites which allow users to upload as well as stream content online, or sometimes they may not even include this list, stating they do not know the identity of the person. Hence, the nature of the order is called John Doe.
Over the last 4 years, there's been a growing trend of various high courts passing such orders. In 2011, Reliance Entertainment was granted a John Doe order by the Delhi High Court for its movie Bodyguard. In 2012, the Madras High Court granted sweeping orders for the Tamil films 3 and Dammu, which resulted in the blanket blocking of torrent websites as well as popular video streaming websites Vimeo and Dailymotion, and even Pastebin, a website used to store text. In the same year, the Bombay High Court followed suit and granted its first John Doe order to Gangs of Wasseypur. In 2014, Fox Star Studios requested the Delhi High Court for a John Doe order to prevent piracy of its big release, Bang Bang, as a result of which nearly 72 websites were blocked. This year, such orders were issued in the cases of Piku, Bombay Velvet, and most recently, for Masan.
Experiences of John Doe orders in the past have included what amounts to overbroad blocking. So the way this actually happens in the courts is that the copyright holder submits a really long list of URLs. Now, under the Copyright Act, they are required to submit a very specific URL, right? That's the link to the specific infringing content. But if you submit a list of 250 URLs, the court doesn't have the resources to check and see whether each one leads to specific infringing content. And so you could have a URL to something like Pastebin. and end up blocking the entire site, because if it's 173 on the list, then nobody has the time or resources to go and see whether it actually leads to your copyrighted content. And to that extent, it is quite a misuse.
Can I ask you a question? Let's surf the net right now and see the amount of downloads you get. So let's understand the objective. You see, a copyright statute is an archaic statute which has now sought a lot of modification, and you see a new copyright statute in place. Even the Cinematographic Act, right, and the Mudgal Committee report, which is being considered for the amendment to the Cinematographic Act, actually contemplates how piracy can be curbed. So really, in terms of statute and the landscape and the legislation, there is a movement to see that, look, ultimately a civil and a criminal liability is the only process you had under statute books. We've gone beyond the statute books. We've really tried to take law to its logical end and to serve its purpose.
It's also important for us to consider that amendments were recently caused to the Copyright Act and specific rules made by the copyright rules in 2013. The copyright rules in Rule 75 in fact contemplate a specific takedown of a specific URL along with particulars with respect to the infringement which is asserted by an owner. It also requires an owner to approach a court within 21 days to confirm the takedown, and in case they do not approach such a court, then the website is not obligated to respond to future notices by such a owner with respect to that work. What comes through quite clearly is that copyright owners seem to be shifting the burden with respect to the enforcement, and they are not interested to a large degree or find it quite inconvenient to comply with the law in its intent.
Let me tell you this. Today, you are aware that a film's life is pegged to about 3 to 4 days. Now, if the film's life, and let me tell you, today the video on demand business, see, if you look at theatrical businesses contribute some part, but the video on demand business today is a very, very sizable market. Now, for a person who's spending money, for the person who's ultimately believing in licensing of correct rights, should that business sort of get depleted by virtue of this kind of piracy?
But the battle against piracy is taking down the good guys as well, and it's also violating our freedom of expression.
It's using a hammer where a needle is necessary. And it's also that, the citizens of India do have the right to access information. It's part of our right to free speech. And so if they're going to have a lot of content that we rightfully should be able to access also blocked, then they are interfering with our constitutional rights.
Despite the sweeping scope of these John Doe orders and the resultant mass blocking of websites, the bad guys often get away scot-free. That's because torrent links mutate and reappear even before you can say popcorn.
There's been a general tendency with respect to producers as well as financiers, when they put their money on such movies, to take all sorts of protection. This is seen by them as a sort of a product, a sort of insurance to be taken, and also the ingenuity of the intellectual property bar in marketing these kind of injunctions and saying that it will be effective in checking piracy, especially in the first few weeks when a movie releases. Of course, this shows a larger and absence of understanding of how the internet works.
So the question is that in this digital age, are John Doe orders the solution to India's piracy problem?
So part of this moving into the global age is also thinking of regulations, as much of the developed world does, as something that leverages markets and leverages social norms, and intelligently comes up with a system that changes user behavior. So, basically the modern definitions of regulation are basically using mechanisms that change behavior. It doesn't have to be banning, and it doesn't have to be criminalization. So if you think of it that way, then encouraging the creation of a Spotify, a Pandora, a Netflix style platform is, in my opinion, the more likely way of changing user behavior. We have tried command control, it does not work, it has a lot of detrimental effects, and so it's really high time that the government and industry think of more innovative solutions.
The same arguments with respect to the protecting the incentive of artists as well as the creative industries versus technology as well as startups has been considered in America, and look at it today. Because of an absence of John Doe injunctions, but the presence of the DMCA, which is the prevalent mode to take down any content which infringes the rights of an owner. The technology industry has progressed and has innovated to a degree.
The genesis of piracy is in the fact that people believe that there is no deterrent to it. I believe that an order like a John Doe order, or what we call as an Ashok Kumar order, is that deterrent. With that deterrent, there must be a mechanism in place to make sure that every deterrent really has a remedial effect. So remedial the cause of piracy, which is so rampant. And I think an implementation of these orders is most critical.
It's ironic that despite all efforts to prevent piracy of Masan, it's been available for download on all torrent websites since its release. After all, taming the internet is a mission impossible even for Tom Cruise. But thankfully for some of us, enjoying a movie at the cinema makes a lot more sense than evading John Doe. In Mumbai, Ayush Elavadi.
Alright, it's time for an intermission, but up next on The Firm, after many years, ADRs are back in fashion. Find out why.
The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.